This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's tape number 410A, side 1. It's October the 12th, 1979. Well, there's a lot of news to cover this week on all kinds of events that are taking place that we could update other tapes. I'm going to spend most of this tape on the San Francisco violence, the sniper, this last weekend, because it's just a microcosm of what goes on here all the time. And some of you listeners weren't familiar with many of these violences that came down at the time of the SLA or the Manson family. And if I take an event that just took place this weekend and show you what transpired, you can understand the study that I've done into these other bits of terrorism, which I believe are caused by the intelligence community and the police community, and will be very useful later in taking over the country. Before I do that, there just were a few important deaths this past week that I wanted to mention. One was the informant Ronnie Howard, who broke the Manson story. She was in a jail cell with Sue Atkins, who later turned state's evidence on the Manson family, and she was responsible for the original breaking of that story. She was hit on the head and had brain surgery, brain damage, and was in the California hospital, Mount Sinai in Los Angeles, and then died. They had come home, she and her husband and her husband's brother had come home from a trip to Las Vegas, and she got into a taxi cab, referred to as a gypsy cab driver, I guess outside of the yellow cab line, for whatever name, and her husband went back into the bus terminal, and when he went out, the car was gone, the cab was gone, and she was gone. She was beaten and robbed and left off somewhere, and 3 days later, her husband reported the crime to the Los Angeles police. Her life had been threatened before, and there were firings into her apartment, and she had been harassed by certain persons that had threatened her life, saying that she was a police agent who snitched on the Mansons. The Manson family, and we'll go into that more later on this tape, was very much part of the COINTEL program and the police department, FBI, CIA operations all along from the time that Manson got out of the federal pen. We've talked about that in past tapes with just briefly, and someday maybe I'll do a whole tape on that. I keep promising. There's a lot of things I want to go back and do for you. But the police department in Los Angeles has said there's no connection between her death and her hemorrhaging in the skull and so forth, with her being the snitch that broke the story about the Mansons. As I say, even though her life was threatened, this is the way the news covers it. Always the police covers it. They don't look for suspects, and they just claim that the $400 she had in cash or $800 in jewelry was the reason that she was beat on the head and finally died from that. A few weeks ago, I was referring to the David Berkowitz case, the son of Sam, and the fact that John Carr, the son of the gentleman that David Berkowitz said in New York was programming him, had died on an Army base. He was shot, and the New York Times has a short article this week that the real son of Sam dies in a car crash. Another son of this Yonkers man who owned the dog that David Berkowitz said was programming him died in Manhattan in an automobile crash. He was 27 years old. It was a one-car accident on a highway. This is the second member of the family to die since Mr. Berkowitz, David Berkowitz, has been imprisoned. He has blamed Sam Carr and his family for programming or giving him the signals to kill. Sam Carr's daughter works at the police department that helped bring in David Berkowitz finally and had a role in catching him, but I believe they knew where he was all along and did have an important part in that case. For those of you who don't have the background, I don't want to fill it in again. You can get the tapes on the son of Sam and David Berkowitz when I did them last year, a year and a half ago. But the select committee was shot at. He's still living. He's in good condition. If you take your New York Times, September 23rd, 1979, there's exactly a two-sentence article, 1 inches, on page 43. Anti-Castro figure is shot, Miami, September 22nd. Antonio Veciano, a former leader of the anti-Castro Cuban exile underground organization Alpha 66, was wounded in the head. There were shots that came from a car nearby and pulled alongside of his car. He is alive. He didn't die. What the one-inch article didn't say in their 2 sentences was that Brzezinski had testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he spoke about having contact with Lee Harvey Oswald in Miami, and that Oswald worked with the CIA. After Senator Church's committee investigated the CIA in 1976, there were a whole series of murders, including John Rosselli, who had testified, Sheffield Edwards of the CIA, and William Harvey of the CIA, all of the men who had provided weapons for killing Fidel Castro and worked with our domestic assassination teams. So this was an ambush in Miami, but so far it hasn't been successful. Each week we go into the Army biological testings and a lot of important information that the Church of Scientology is getting through the Freedom of Information Act. They sort of have one-time bomb a week. This week it was poison pigeons spread blight, U.S. Army biological warfare tests. Tests were conducted in December of 1950, and infections were put on homing pigeons, and they dropped contaminated turkey feathers in cluster bombs over oat crops in upstate New York and in the Virgin Islands to see if they could get a rust epidemic on cereal where the oats were growing, and spread it, use this as a biological warfare weapon. I wonder if there's any people living in these areas, the Virgin Islands or in New York, where the drugs were tested, in Watertown, New York, where there would be an upsurge of cancer since the government and the Pentagon decided to drop these. This was under the Army Chemical Corps Biological Department at Fort Derry, Maryland, of course, and they trained these birds to see if they could drop infections, and they did, in fact, drop infections, and they showed that it could be harmful to crops and get a cereal rust epidemic. So that a chemical warfare, by letting birds carry chemicals into the crops, you can starve off people, you can use animals for this kind of testing, and that did prove that it would work. And then the outcome of the people who eat the oats, I don't know whether they would grow or be killed, the crops would be killed, but they were feather dusted with cereal rust spores and flown by M16A1 adapters, and they use these bombers for whatever technical purposes. I use those numbers because in the military and in the news media they use aircraft with these numbers as if that number means anything. The article simply tells you what happened but doesn't explain any outrage except that oats and food can be contaminated and were contaminated, and it was very successful to affect the seedling oats. Now I want to talk about the San Francisco siege. After I spent 8 years cross-filing the Warren Commission hearings, those 26 volumes of the witness testimony and evidence, after John Kennedy was killed, I knew that I had an education equal to any university in law or in criminology to solve these crimes, because the blueprint for assassinations, the blueprint for police involvement, for the legal involvement is all there. The use of doubles, of aliases, the tactical support. The work was not wasted in terms of general experience. When I was working to solve the John Kennedy assassination, I also was learning about the entire intelligence community and their modus operandi. My main files of newspaper clippings that I kept and try to keep in chronological order outside of the filing cabinets and the boxes and drawers that I have are in 6 main categories, and these are terribly important. One was the John Kennedy assassination, putting the articles in chronological order in 3 whole notebooks so you could see how the story broke and ran through the years. That was in 1963. The Martin Luther King assassination in 1968. The Robert Kennedy assassination in 1968. These are all spiral notebooks that I have, and those of you who've seen my home know the research, the way they're lined up. And then the Manson family in 1969, followed by notebooks on the Chappaquiddick affair in 1969, the same year, and then the George Wallace shooting in 1972. Of course, there was too much Watergate to put in notebooks, but the reason I mention this is that in between these election violences where John Kennedy was killed, the President of the United States, that affected the 1964-68 elections, The Martin Luther King assassination that brought on Spiro Agnew and the riots just prior to the elections, Robert Kennedy's assassination altering the 68-72 candidate. Fitting in there was the German Nazi Reichstag military intelligence type of operation, the Manson family terrorism, that would affect political speeches, candidates, and the climate of America and begin this spread of terror into the suburbs, followed again by Chappaquiddick in '69, which stopped Ted Kennedy from running, and then Wallace shooting, which kept George Wallace from running, and those votes went to Richard Nixon. But many people don't understand the Manson role, the way the creation of the Manson family came right into this story. But one of the first articles, actually the first published article about Charles Manson, was in a magazine by Ed Butler called Did Hate Kill Tate? And it's about how the Black Panthers came into the white suburbs and killed these 6 white people because of their vengeance against society, and Death to the Pigs was written with blood over the door of the house. And it was written by Ed Butler, the man for military intelligence that worked with Lee Harvey Oswald and made a record with Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. And I began to immediately get connections of the links to the Kennedy assassination to the Manson family. And that's how I got so early into studying the terrorism, by saving every article and breaking down the cast of characters and meeting policemen involved in the arrest and following that closely. And that's why I could get into the SLA story very early and the Jonestown. And because the San Francisco episode this weekend was so short, it's easier and not as complicated as Jonestown to study. I want to share it with you. First of all, the siege. The sniper went to a tall building in San Francisco. He had a hand grenades tied to his body, a grenade belt. He had military commando clothing, and he went into a fairly straight, really straight building, not in the hippie part of town, the Unemployment Compensation Department building on 9th and Market Street. And at 5:29, he began to announce that he had this hostage. It wasn't difficult for him to get through the doors with that kind of an outfit and an orange backpack and all the weapons, his M1 rifle and so forth. He carried a lot of equipment and went right through this building upstairs. The only good thing about the whole weekend was that it got the Pope off the front page. The papers up here were just filled with it. I don't know how much coverage you got in the East Coast or up north or the Midwest, but immediately he was on the telephone calling the Chronicle newspapers. I've got a bomb here, give me the mayor. I want a direct line with the mayor, and of course Dianne Feinstein and the others, Joe Freitas, the district attorney. There's a big San Francisco election in 4 weeks, a re-election, and their name was pretty muddy after the Dan White case and the Jonestown story that linked to all of them, and they're up for re-election, and the police department was looking pretty bad. There's a lot of crime there. There were riots during the gay demonstrations and the police harassing the gays. So the mayor became an instant heroine, 17 hours on telephone calls. He asked for the mayor, and he wanted to speak to former President Ford. Somehow or other, it wasn't in our local newspapers. I didn't see that President Ford was in San Francisco, but in some way he began with asking to speak to Gerald Ford, who was up there, and we'll go to that in a little bit. He took a hostage, and she wasn't hurt. She was a secretary up in the building, Chio Tashimaro, and he kept her with him during this siege. Now, when Charles Bates was with the FBI and moved to San Francisco, he had been in Washington in the Justice Department investigating the Watergate, and then he was sent out here for the SLA operation and the zebra killings that preceded the SLA. Charles Bates was in Chicago in the FBI when Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were gunned down. When he resigned from the FBI just this last year, he took on a role with KGO radio station, which is a 24-hour propaganda bullshit station that has a lot of trivia, rock trivia, little interest stories, suggestions of where to eat and where to go in San Francisco. And if anything controversial gets on, they literally freak out. You can't make political connections, and they laud all the wrong people and interview them and praise them, the various people on the radio. Charles Bates went to work for KGO, which was a clue, and I might have mentioned a long time ago on these tapes, but I mentioned it on the air up there, that at KPFA, that with Bates in the area, the violence would continue because that was his expertise, and being at KGO, he'd be carrying the big stories. Now, strangely enough, he was totally silent this whole weekend. This is his expertise, and this gentleman said he was from the SLA. He called himself the SLA WU, the World Organization, for helping the poor. But Bates was peculiarly silent the entire 48 hours, which is not typical for Charles Bates. The police had a training school set up in San Francisco 4 years ago in 1974. It was set up by a gentleman named Harvey Schlossberg, Schlossberg. I wonder if he's from Project Paperclip. He began his work in Munich in 1972, working on terrorists at the Munich Olympic Games, and that's where 15 athletes and Arabs were killed on an army base. All 15 were blown up at an army base, and that was the beginning of TV violence with CBS and NBC right there at the Munich Olympic Games. The Jewish students were killed, but that's when the Americans got into the act and decided, well, we'll study terrorism. And Dr. Schlossberg was also, in addition to being a psychologist, he worked as a detective in New York. And he came to San Francisco in 1974. And that's when Charles Gaines from the Oakland COINTEL program, police activities there, he was moved to San Francisco. Bates was out from Chicago and Washington and London previously. And Dr. Schlossberg became the training center for terrorism, and he had schools for training police as far as San Diego, Eureka, California. He worked with the FBI, Naval Investigation Service, Nevada State Prison, Arizona State Police, and more than 70 agents. There were 2 police officers working with this hostage that got the main headlines. One was Vince Repetto. One newspaper article said that he was brought from Northern California, that he wasn't on the regular team. Another article said he was part of the San Francisco police team. But he had 4 years of training, or 5 years of training with hostage work, but this was only the second time in 5 years that he got to use the training. Of course, the headlines say, police training pays off. They'd all been working 5 years, but Repetto was the gentleman, along with a female who had just finished her course. This was her first work at hostage work, and it was her dry run, and I think it was her graduation exercise, too. I don't know whether Repetto was brought in from the north or from San Francisco, but he worked with this particular riot training team. Now, the woman who was also brought in, Maureen D'Amico, 28 years old, some of the newspaper articles said that when they found out that the sniper liked women, a major breakthrough came Saturday morning when they discovered that he had a mother complex and that he was devoted to his mother, so they decided to bring women to help in the negotiations. But another article says a woman was the key negotiator, sniper, and she worked with Dr. Chris Hatcher, a psychologist from the University of California, Langley Porter, which was named as a recipient of CIA funds and experiments like Vacaville in California. And this story says that she was on the scene right from the start, working with her co-negotiator, Officer Repetto, so that they were in charge of the entire negotiations. Now, the TV story on Sunday evening had an interview with a man who saw Cullinane when he broke into the building, and said that he described him as a man who was dressed like a news media terrorist. If any of you saw the movie Putney Swope, you know what he's referring to. If you haven't seen it, go see it if it's on reruns or on television. Make a note and see the movie Putney Swope, and you'll see a TV terrorist, and that's the way he was dressed, and that's what he was. And all of these terrorists asked for the maximum attention by the news media and called the Examiner and the Chronicle and radio and television stations to get maximum attention. Now, Gerald Ford was in town. As I say, it wasn't in the papers that I noticed, the Examiner or the Chronicle or the San Jose Mercury, but this gentleman knew that he was in town, and an article said he was in San Francisco for a political appearance. Right away, the terrorism was associated in the news media with the politics and the elections, which it will be used by the politicians, for the next weeks in San Francisco and the national elections, also Reagan and others. It's like Richard Nixon setting up his violence in Caracas, Venezuela. When Gerald Ford was in San Francisco running for president, Sarah Jane Moore took a shot at him, missed him, but was in San Francisco working with the FBI, got her weapons from the IRS, and went to their special gunmen over in the Bay Area. Squeaky Fromm in San Francisco from the Manson family she was in Sacramento and took a pot shot supposedly at Ford, never explaining how in the world she got that close to him, and she's serving her time in prison for that now. If the media thought that he looked like a media terrorist, if the witnesses saw that, I also wonder about the woman, the hostage, who was taken, the secretary that was taken for several days, Chio Tashiro. As soon as she was released and saw Mayor Dianne Feinstein, the first question she asked was, "Did I do okay?" And the response was super. The front page of the Sunday Examiner said, "Snipers, wild siege ends, the hostage is okay." Then next to it, right along with it, is bizarre tale of new Manson family. And of course, this is a story that comes out of Long Beach Independent Press, that the Manson family's on a spree again. You see, it's right side by side by the terrorists, that the Manson family has 60 members now, and the SLA has 100, and that they're now joined. And this particular terrorist in San Francisco was using the name SLA, that he was a member of the SLA. This article on the Manson family said that the street sources have told the FBI and other agents that they're planning something that will make the Patty Hearst thing look like Penny Ante. And I believe this could happen, but the authorities, if they have information on these people, are sitting by and watching it. They have said that the group has $2 million, that they have proficient helicopter pilots, they have stockpiled weapons, they have stockpiled gold, they have thousands of dollars of dry food, they've bought solar panels from New Jersey, scientific labs. Well, where are the weapons, and where's the food stockpiled, and who is the lab in New Jersey that has sent them solar panels? And the FBI, according to the Long Beach story, says has delayed arrest, that there was an August 26th burglary in the San Joaquin area of $20,000, another bank robbery in Sunnyvale, $199,000 armored car bank robbery in Stockton, and nobody is moving in on these robberies. Now, this is the way Nazi money and rightist organizations are funding money in England, fighting the Irish, and also in France and in Italy, by these bank robberies that admittedly have gone to right-wing Nazi groups. I talked last week about missing money from the Vatican and the dangers of not accounting for it. Well, this group, and these are neo-Nazis, the SLA Manson group, are not liberal in the sense that they want to feed the poor. It's the way that Adolf Hitler attacked the Wall Street gang and wanted to feed the poor. Joseph Romero from the SLA was quoted when he returned from Vietnam that he enlisted a second time because he didn't get enough action the first time. He came home then and murdered Dr. Marcus Foster, a black head schoolmaster, head of the Oakland School District, the superintendent. The two ringleaders of the Manson family right now are supposed to be Kenneth Como and Catherine Gypsy Scher. I've talked to Gypsy. She's called me. I haven't talked to her in about a year. She's called me quite a few times. I've gotten letters from former prisoners. The FBI, CIA are allowing the Manson family outside of Folsom to form, and down in the Southern California area, it's a right-wing group that would link with the Minutemen and the San Diego Army, the secret army organizations that have intelligence connections. And I have talked to various people in prison and had contact with them through the years, and the prison system has allowed them to get out and to begin to stockpile these weapons. According to this one article on Manson, they mentioned that he had a $600 guitar in prison, and that Kenneth Como now is wearing a $2,400 Tiffany gold watch and chain at Folsom. He must be the most heavily dressed dude at Folsom Prison. But there's a lot of money behind this group, and Charles Tex Watson, who did all the killings of the Manson family, and Mr. and Mrs. Bianca the next night, who did the stabbings and went into the homes. Manson wasn't in the homes. Said that he would be getting out of prison, that there was organized crime money that would help him get out. He's now a pastor in San Luis Obispo and recently married. Now, the lingo in San Francisco, the newspapers and the radio, we got constant repetition of the words terrorism. This man was called Chief Cherokee of the SLA WOO, W-O-O. They referred to his comrades all the time, the compatriots, the hostages. And then there were other words. His first description was a Latin man, and the suggestion that maybe this is like El Salvador or Nicaragua, we should get ready. The girlfriend's name was Injun Tomlinson, and Chief Cherokee, the head of the Cherokee Nation. There were words like negotiating teams in the newspaper and on the air. Intelligence sources tell us he's friendly towards women. There's hostage negotiating training. There's police command centers. There's 12-member negotiating teams set up. There's sniper negotiators. These words were going through the radio and in the newspaper, and it's a whole new vocabulary that you'll get used to eventually. I bought a book recently, a wonderful book called The Doomsday Dictionary, and it's about our 20th century. It came out in 1963. Words like ABC, atomic, biological, chemical warfare, air, a definition of the difference between clean air and the kind of air that gets polluted, Konrad Adenauer, air raids, air bursts, the Alliance for Progress, anabiosis, that's suspended animation when the astronauts need food, water, and atmosphere, alpha, one of the three principal types of nuclear emissions, the apathy, how the Doomsday Dictionary comes into effect, what apathy is, asteroid bombs, and so forth. I will do maybe a tape for you if you can't get that book, the Doomsday Dictionary. But the Dictionary of Terrorism is also important because they implant the suggestion of all these commands and comrades when it turns out there was a well-trained team and one man and a very quiet hostage. Always in these stories are the aliases. This fellow was known as Chico Cochran. To his girlfriend, he was Gary McIntosh. With American Express cards, he was Gary Cullinane. He was Wayne Tilleman. He was Wayne Callahan. That turned out to be his real name. And he was William Chuck Cochran. And he was John Orcheco when he checked into a motel in Redwood City. Always there's multiple personalities, which reminds me of Candy Jones and Arlene Grant, and the creation of doubles for various purposes with different identifications and driver's license and so forth. While the police didn't have his name and didn't know who he was, they knew to put on women negotiators because they said he called his mother in Providence, Rhode Island, and he had called his girlfriend over in Berkeley, and they knew that he called his mother every week. At that time, they didn't know who he was, and they didn't know his real name, but they knew that he had contact with his parents, with his mother. And in this case, this girlfriend in Berkeley, and I'll go into a little further, it reminds me that there were so many women involved in these other mind control programs where the women led the men and then faded away, knew a little bit and housed them or took care of them, but then faded out of the picture. But they seem to know that he was familiar with a lot of men, and so far there isn't one male that he's associated with that they've identified. There's also, again, the question of doubles, the suspicion of doubles. I don't know when or how they would be switched, but the first man seen in the building was this 29-year-old Latin male, and he dark-complected, and he had been, this person who later was arrested had been in Tijuana, Mexico, and he was teaching children to box down there. The one who was arrested was from Rhode Island, a Catholic family, white, Irish, not dark-complected, and 22 years old. Not only were there discrepancies in what they saw and the person described, but the photographs in the newspaper, side by side, it appears to be a totally different person. There's a difference in the eyes, and there's a difference in the distance of the nose to the lips. There's a difference in the lip shapes, and also the mustaches are entirely two different people. No matter what he did when he was arrested and was photographed, picked up, you couldn't have two different mustaches and be shaved and have appearance when at the time you're apprehended and the time you're in the jail. There's a difference in appearance. On the other side of this tape, I want to go into his profile, the same mysteries that appear in all these assassinations and snipings, and the same unanswered questions, and some of the evidence that there's foul play here. For creating this scene in San Francisco at this time. This is Mae Brussell. This is side 2 of tape 410, and it's October the 12th, 1979. And we're talking about the siege in San Francisco, the sniper that took the city for 23 or 24 hours last Friday and through Saturday, and then was arrested and then died in the San Francisco jail, was found hung Monday morning. And all of these conspiracies or these violences or terrorism set up particularly just prior to elections. Prior to Ronald Reagan's election, when he ran for governor, Mark Essex was shooting down in New Orleans at the Holiday Inn. The Holiday Inn, again, figures in this story. He left handwriting on the walls, and he was murdered, and there was a suggestion that 2 people were shooting, but only 1 was killed. And that was the time Ronald Reagan wanted the federal government and the CIA to begin experiments on mind control of people in the United States based upon those violences. This particular terrorist in San Francisco was described by his mother similar to Tex Watson and other so-called violent terrorists that appeared later as a altar boy, a good boy, a Boy Scout, a little leaguer. And then around 16 years old, he got into drugs and was locked up in a mental hospital, and something changed his personality. Now, he had mental breakdown, he acted weird, but the unanswered questions always are, what is their source of money? If he was, from the time he was 16, released from a mental hospital, how did he support himself for the next 6 years? How would this young person get out to California, from Rhode Island to New York to Berkeley, down to Texas, Orange County, and travel around? There's a lot of mobility of these people, and I believe they say at safe houses and mind jobs are done on them, and there's this tactical support of women and no medical history. It's always, of course, the privacy of the patient is protected, so you never know what they were treated for or what doctors had their hands on them. This Wayne Cullinane got an American Express card under the name of Gary McIntosh, but they don't explain where he got the card. He purchased weapons in San Francisco with it, so did Sarah Jane Moore, and weapons from San Francisco ended up in Jonestown, and weapons in San Francisco have been in many mysterious COINTEL programs. As far as the American Express card goes, where did he get it? Was it mailed to him? Was it stolen? Did he have tactical support that somebody handed to him? Was there really a Gary McIntosh that they were using it? Was there anything else on the credit card besides the weapons that would say where he had been or anything about him, and what did he use it for? They also said in addition to the American Express card, he had traveler's checks. Well, traveler's checks are a way of cash, and he may have been using one of these aliases that match the American Express card. You have to sign your name, but who puts up the cash for the traveler's checks if you're going into fancy motels and traveling around and going up from Los Angeles to the Bay Area and you're writing traveler's checks? Somebody put the cash behind it. So then the question is, what employment? If he didn't have tactical support, he had a job, unless he stole something and they haven't proved that he broke into any banks or did any robberies. September the 25th, he rented a yellow car at the Los Angeles airport, and he arrived up in the Bay Area by the 29th of September and checked into the Redwood townhouse, but the yellow car was painted blue and the license plates were switched. That's another trick to obtain extra license plates. How do you get those? And under whose name were the license plates? Again, tactical support. He has all these identifications that the government provides. Remember when the men were arrested at Watergate and they had the aliases and the identification of different names? Well, how many people can get these traveler's checks without, there's some means of getting those? Your American Express card, who is that Gary McIntosh? He painted a car blue and was in San Francisco next day. Now, it takes 6 or 10 hours to drive from Los Angeles to Redwood City, but where did he paint it blue? Did he have it in a car shop? Did they paint it blue? Did he paint it in front of an apartment? Did he do it himself? Did someone else do it for him? Was there a quick switch? In other words, what tactical technique was used to take a car out of the L.A. airport yellow, have it blue, and be in the Bay Area 4 days later with other license plates. Now, he checked into the Redwood townhouse, and he could have paid either with his American Express card or his traveler's checks, but on September 29th, he went to the Holiday Inn and stole a Mercedes-Benz. Now, he went up to the building in style in a Mercedes-Benz with his army fatigues, with an orange backpack filled with weapons and a stocking mask he's to put on, and he drives to that state building, the insurance building, and goes up to the 16th floor, the office there, this building, in a Mercedes-Benz. Well, now the sniping spree was over by Sunday, October the 7th, but who owned the car that he drove in? Did the police report it missing? Was it an out-of-town guest? Because the first report was that he was at this Redwood motel, the Redwood townhouse, and that he had a car that came from Las Vegas. And now they say that he stole a car from the Holiday Inn in San Francisco. Was it Vegas? Was Vegas involved in this case, like it was in all these other tricky little deals? And where was it parked? Where was a stolen Mercedes-Benz parked? Well, the siege was going on in San Francisco at the parking lot, and that's pretty fancy transportation to get himself up to the 16th floor in such a fancy car. Who is the owner, and how did he take it away from the Holiday Inn? How did he get the keys to the car? And how come the police weren't looking for the car, and it was in the city? And where was the car held until the siege took place? Because now he had two vehicles of transportation. And where was this car held, this Mercedes, until this date of the siege? The Oakland police stated that they had arrested Wayne Cullinane in October of last year, October the 9th, 1978, and that they had arrested him on suspicion of driving under influence of drugs, of auto theft, of possession of stolen property, and driving without a valid license. Now, if he had a history of mental illness and was under influence of the drugs and they arrested him, where was the arrest charge, and why didn't they hold him, and how come there was no court hearing or a warrant out for him, or a warrant and they didn't seek him? And another article said that he hadn't had an arrest since 1974 in Rhode Island, but in 1978 the Oakland police seemed to know who he was and didn't go after him. They released him, which is typical of the Oakland police when we get into the SLA and the role they had in letting those people out loose the 3 weeks that they knew members of the SLA's names and occupations until Patty Hearst was successfully kidnapped. While the hostage was still held and he was in the building, the television news said that he had a car stolen from Las Vegas. Well, who in Las Vegas did it belong to, and did it come from the LA airport or Las Vegas, and how did they know then, if he was using an alias, about where the car came from? How did Wayne Cullinane, dressed as a comrade in army fatigue with his backpack and all these weapons, get in the building? The story is that he went to the State Compensation Insurance Fund and he put a gun to the head of a female janitor. They do have security clearances down there, but no metal detectors. He didn't look weird to anybody. He put a gun, as I say, to the head of the janitor, and then he went down the hall and took another secretary in the building down the hall. Then he went to the office of John Wiebers, the board vice president, who wasn't in of this insurance office, and took the secretary as a hostage. Now, he took one woman as a hostage that he kept there, the one who later said, "Did I do okay? Did I do all right?" And he released the other two people. The secretary and the janitor got away. Now, if he had a gun to their head, two of them, and went into a building where he had a backpack, even if it was concealed weapons, he was looking a little weird right now with a gun and a weapon and a stocking mask over his head up on the 16th floor. Did those two people, the janitor and the other secretary, ever call the police? There's no record that the police knew anything that was going on in this building until he made calls out on the telephone in that office with a perfect view of all of Market Street, and he could tie up 16 blocks and threaten to bomb the city and inconvenience people in that whole area. It's a very strategic area with crosswalks. Across the street is the theater where Danson was playing. That show was canceled. Further down the street was the Opera House. People were at the opera but left early and left their cars. the underground parking, and so forth. It's near a law school, Hastings Law School, that had to put off tests that Saturday. People came from Alaska, Florida, and all over, and they couldn't take these law tests because of the sniper. He tied up the entire city, literally, but he had two people who he escorted. They escorted him to where he was going, up on the 16th floor. They had a gun to their head. He had a stocking mask, supposedly. They go downstairs. Don't they yell, "Hey, there's someone upstairs. Go to the 16th floor. The secretary's a hostage up there. We got away." Did they ever report it to the police, or was this synchronized to test, and I'll go into the motives in a little bit, the police psychological systems and the terrorist shtick for these election maneuvers? Because it seems very weird watching and listening to the television and the media, the radio, closely this weekend, that I never saw a face of any of those people who escorted him, and why they never called the police or got into the act of stopping the action immediately, because they could have just run into the 16th floor and taken the room, and even though there was a hostage, just gone in at that time and removed him. There were police nearby. The area is right near the police department, and it's just a few blocks from Golden Gate, the federal offices and the FBI. Can you visualize him going past security guards in a building with a stocking mask and a bag filled with all kinds of weapons, and just going on upstairs, and those people that escaped from him not responding in any way? The first reports were that Wayne Cullinane, who registered under an alias at this Redwood City motel, was unknown to anybody, his real name, because he did use this alias. But there was an interview with Mr. Vince Repetto, the officer, the plainclothes officer handling the case. In quotes, he said, "We ran into a problem. We misidentified him for the first 8 hours. That would be Friday and through Friday night. We thought he was someone else. We got a profile from the Secret Service of a man we thought was our man, but after 8 hours we realized we didn't have the man." And I'm wondering why the Secret Service was working with Officer Vince Repetto at this time, except that the Secret Service was also working with Sarah Jane Moore and was Squeaky Fromm, and they have a way of getting right into these particular violences that are nestled into the San Francisco, California counterintelligence terrorism. Now, Wayne's girlfriend, much older than him, he was 22, she was 27, she went by the name of Injun. Can you believe this? It reminds me of the stories of the Carter assassination attempt in Los Angeles with that Lee Harvey Oswaldo, those ridiculous names. Her name is Injun Tomlinson, and she had kept Wayne Cullinane with her. She knew him as Chico, and he had lived with her for 3 months before he went south. And he came back to her 3 weeks ago and wanted to travel around the country with her. He didn't say how he was going to get his money, but that doesn't matter. Neither did the Manson family, the SLA. They could get to Pennsylvania or Los Angeles. And the transportation, the wheels are there, the false identifications, the extra driver's license, and the license plates. They have that mobility. So Chief Cherokee SLA Wu was friendly with Injun Tomlinson, and she didn't like him because she said she was a hippie. Many of these women up at Telegraph Hill in Berkeley are disguised as hippie. It's really like the Casbah of agents. She was the hippie. He was the straight man. He liked disco. He wasn't political. He was very conservative, straight hair. He didn't like her barefoot, plain clothing. She had him at her place for 3 months. He went south, and then he came back and was ready to take a trip around the country. Except for Injun and one other female friend of hers in Berkeley, who went over to the building while all the negotiations were going on. As I say, there's no man who has seen him, no one who's come forward, no associate, a male, the tactical support coming from the female, and there is just these two women who had any contact with him that the media has bothered to interview. Remember when Artie Brammer was arrested for the attempted killing of George Wallace, and right away his girlfriend comes forward, and they have all these wonderful little females that are used for these human interest stories, but never saying who pays for his hotel at the Waldorf Astoria, or a room up in Canada, or his transportation to Michigan, or the hotel, Marriott Hotel in Maryland. The media never bothers to delve into the really hard questions. They just get the little stories, the Megan Marshak story with Rockefeller, and never the real story of the males or the manipulation that makes these activities possible. As I say, in the Manson case, when he got out of prison, he went to Berkeley, to the same area where he went with a librarian who helped set him up, an educated woman, when he got out of prison. And then he went over to the Haight-Ashbury area and then began to collect his buses and vans and women. Nancy Ling Perry from Santa Rosa, California, moved down to Berkeley and was active, again, with the government, with intelligence operations, set up the SLA. Another woman working with Donald DeFreeze, visiting him in prison, and Emily Harris coming out from Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, and the narc squads there to work in the prison systems with the black guerrillas and with Donald DeFreeze. A Lawrence Kwong, who was an example of terrorism and suicide, self-demolition afterwards in San Francisco, who shot at the KGO building, was with a woman who took him to Hawaii, an older woman, and he had weapons, an apartment in California Street, a hospitalization with secret reports, again, of what he was doing. That was hushed up. Herbert Mullen, another one of these California zombies, was working, again, at the Holiday Inn down at the wharf. No, it was a travel lodge he was working at, and I'll have to check that out. Herbert Mullen was taken by a woman, and he was at an army base in Hawaii, and then came home and heard voices and killed a priest and was part of this Santa Cruz, California violence of a mind control job in the control of a woman. And where did I first learn about women? By the greatest wife of all, Marina Oswald, and the job that she did with Lee Harvey Oswald as the control agent over him and setting up that operation. It's interesting that the Oakland police had an arrest warrant out for Wayne Cullinane, because that's a very important city. The Oakland area is where Candy Jones was sent out all the way from New York City to Dr. Jensen for a mind control job, to be given two personalities so that she could do work for the Central Intelligence Agency. Oakland is the area where Romero and Little were, and the shootouts took place in the Berkeley-Oakland area, in Concord actually, but there's a small geographical area. One little town runs into the next, and after they were arrested and the house was burned down in Concord, there was the name of Patty Hearst and a getaway van and the information that she'd be kidnapped, and the names of Emily William Harris and Willie Wolfe and various members of the SLA. And the Oakland police, the Berkeley police, had 3 weeks to arrest all of these people, and Patty wouldn't have been kidnapped, but they let the violence take place. And of course, Chief of Police Gaines, that was his territory with the Black Panthers and the various shootouts, the Oakland area. So again, the Oakland police had information about Wayne Cullinane and did nothing about it and released him as a time bomb so that he could return later and be useful to the police. And he was useful to the police. Very important to these negotiations is always the psychological CIA police expert on political terrorism. In this case, it's Dr. Hatcher. He's from the University of California, as I said before, Langley Porter, and he gave out a profile about a man, he didn't know him at all, Wayne Cullinane, that he said he wanted to die for a cause. He was on television Sunday, and Wayne would be dead on Monday morning. He said it became clear he wanted to die for a cause. He had extraordinary demands, $5 million to distribute to the poor. His plan was self-destructive. If you're able to die for a cause, then your death will stand for something. It's that same script used about Lee Harvey Oswald. He didn't like the left, the USSR. He didn't like the right or the middle United States, but he wanted a place in history. He wanted to be known, and it makes it look as if these are political kamikaze deaths, where they're actually police operations used for politicians for election campaigns and to give professions and notoriety to people like Dr. Jolly West and Dr. Hatcher. Hatcher said he had delusions of organization of power. He had compatriots and comrades, and he would act as if he were working in unison but overruled by the group. Those fantasies that Donald DeFreeze had of being a great leader like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were part of the fantasies that Vacaville gave him. You see, it's one thing to have fantasies that you want organization and power, that you have comrades and compatriots. It's another thing to be able to take a Mercedes-Benz and credit cards and expense money and all kinds of cash that you need and pull up to a building and walk through the building and take some people to escort you to an office, and then they depart and don't turn you in. It's the tactical support that Donald DeFreeze has when he goes to Soledad and he walks out of there and goes back to his compatriots in Berkeley, and the police don't even look for him there when they've been corresponding and visiting him in prison. It's one thing to have the vision of being the leader, the comrade, to die in glory. It's another thing to have the tactical support to make these fantasies appear as the reason for all of these things that come down. This man took in that building a .30 caliber carbine. He took a .410 shotgun, even a toy pistol, hand grenades, flares with batteries that were taped to his body. And Dr. Hatcher comes in with a total news media coverage, out here at least, on his suicidal wishes to be famous, to go famous, and be killed by the police. And sure enough, the prophecy is fulfilled, because within 24 hours, less than 24 hours, in 12 hours, he is dead in the police department and killed by the police. There's another important thing that takes place here, and that's why I read these documents to you each week that are coming out because of the Freedom of Information Act about the government spray, whether it's on oats or whether it's to make us lose our resistance, the tests in Utah, to cause delirium, or whether the sprays in San Francisco to round people up, to lose their reflexes so that they can be rounded up. This particular operation requires drugging so that the persons can be killed before they speak. At the time of the SLA, when I wrote my article, the SLA is the CIA, I mentioned that the neighbor next door was asleep in the bathtub, drowsy, and that these people, 3 of them tried to leave the building and were shot down at close range, and 3 were asleep. With all this firing, had died underneath and were asleep. At the time of the FBI shooting of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, where Charles Bates was, the FBI agent O'Neill, who was a best friend of Fred Hampton's, gave him a substance that obviously Fred Hampton didn't taste, but which made him drowsy. So when the police broke in and gunned down the door and gunned him to the head in bed and made sure he was dead, he didn't even have time to wake up. Well, in this case, and in the SLA case, they sent out for their food. The FBI man wasn't the agent inside, like in Chicago, but they brought no food with them for the siege. They had no provisions, and everything was brought in from the outside, the food and drink. And this gentleman asked for food, and they brought from McDonald's some hamburgers and soft drinks, which he drank and also the hostage drank. And they were very sleepy, and they were fed these foods. And then when the police broke in Saturday afternoon, he was described in the newspaper as yellow and jaundiced and weird-colored. The San Francisco Examiner said that he was bent over and limp, his face was yellowish and distorted, he was almost jaundiced, and he just looked almost comatose. When the police came in, both the hostage and the great terrorist, Wayne Cullinane, were asleep. He was lying down in fetal position, sound asleep, and his hostage had a blanket, and she was sound asleep. And when the police came in, he was almost comatose and discolored, and I believe that they made him that way by whatever they brought down in a tasteless substance identical to what Fred Hampton got or the SLA got, so that the victory would be the police's. No police, nobody would be hurt, and the only victim, of course, were the taxpayers in San Francisco and Mr. Cullinane, who then was killed the next morning, just 24 hours or 12 hours later, as I say. These tasteless substances are given. They were given to Hugo Pinell at his trial that I attended in Salinas. He was charged with killing a guard at Soledad, and he was sitting there, and you would believe it was an important trial, because killing a guard and being a defendant with the San Quentin Six being up at San Quentin when George Jackson was killed and the guards were killed, you'd think he would be awake, but Hugo would fall over the table drowsy and fall asleep at the table. He passed out at the table. And Robert Hyde told me that they were putting tranquilizers in food up at Vacaville. So I know in the SLA case, and it's been proven in the Chicago case and also in San Francisco, that these people get sick and get drowsy, and then the police come in and solve the case, and everybody's grateful that it didn't get worse, and the chemical company has done it one more time. Now, before I run out on this tape, I'll have to talk about who gains from all this craziness, and it is total craziness. There's an article in the paper yesterday by Sanford Gottlieb, the head article, "Americans Forget There Are No Winners in a Nuclear War." the insanity of nuclear weapons and what we're doing. But if you heard Mr. Brzezinski several days ago, I believe it was on Wednesday, on television saying over in NATO and Germany that he wouldn't hesitate to use atomic weapons and go to war. Of course, Mr. Brzezinski and Mr. Kissinger are not Americans, and the mistake Americans forget is not that there are no winners in a nuclear war. They forget there's no winners in arming against the Soviet Union and using Germans and Poles and Nazis to lead our government. Now, in San Francisco and the streets of this country will get violence because there are no winners in this kind of craziness. What are the motives here in San Francisco? First of all, the elections, as I said, are coming up in 4 weeks. The police are in bad shape because of the terrible prosecution of Dan White, who was a member of the San Francisco Police Department, the unsolved Zodiac killings, the beating up of the gay community, the riots the night of the Dan White sentencing, and they don't even go back to less than a year ago to the Jonestown links to all of the San Francisco politicians who are running for re-election, Mayor Feinstein and Freitas, who wants to be the district attorney again. Freitas and Feinstein are in the news, so this way they caught the man. Feinstein was up, as I say, 17 hours with the negotiators. Her name was in the news, and it makes them look like they are working hard. And then the articles come out that the police are the saviors. Articles come out praising the police department. They came out smelling like a rose. Another thing is that by having the death of Mr. Cullinane, he was found hung in his cell Monday morning. He was supposed to have every 30-minute check. He was in the Dan White cell. The psychiatrist had said he was suicidal. And instead of watching him after 3 in the morning, nobody came by till 6:30 in the morning, and he was hanging. And they said they heard noises in the cell in the area and thought it was normal, even though there was a 30-minute check. But what it brought out was we need more police. We need more police in the jails. We don't have enough money with Proposition 13. There's violence on the bus in San Francisco. Juveniles, they don't ask for one child psychiatrist. They don't ask to go to one home to see what children are doing or why they're doing it. They say, get out the cat o' nine tails. They call the radio stations and start public flogging. Get police on every bus. Get police on the rapid transit and more police in the jail. So this it increases the budget and the necessity for more police. Another payoff is that the new graduates of terrorism get their degrees. This woman and this man who carried this entire thing were tested in this school. One was a new graduate. The other man had only done one job of terrorism in 5 years. And in Los Angeles, when the SWAT team came out, they were ready. The military were ready to come on the streets of America at prime time and kill in your dinner hour and test your stomach for cremating 6 people without a trial. And it worked. Nobody said anything. Nobody cared. They accepted it like they would if it were Vietnam. That was the inauguration in America on public television of the SWAT team, the military teams. And in San Francisco, the terrorism team paid off because they figured 5 years of training and it worked. And now they have this command post, these psychiatrists, and the men and women with all kinds of operations getting ready in case there are uprisings in this country. Another point is that Sheriff Hangista, who was considered too liberal by many in San Francisco, was coaxed out of going and went to Cleveland and then to New York and appointed in his place as a Sheriff Brown. I'm very close with a black sheriff that worked up there with Hangista and left there after Hangista left. He went on to Harvard to take future studies, but he told me he couldn't stay in the sheriff's department because of the rampant racism in San Francisco. They're literally like the Klan or Nazis, and they can't stand the blacks. They're in charge of the sheriff's department. And Sheriff Brown was appointed to this job after Hangista left, and the elections come up in 4 weeks, and the newspapers are filled with all kinds of articles on the laxness of Sheriff Brown, that 2 men were killed in the jail this last week, and 2 more the month before, and there's been 4 escapes. One of the men who escaped was represented by Mr. Schmidt, the attorney for Dan White. He escaped, and then another gentleman escaped out of the bathroom when the sheriff was watching him. The sheriffs are letting them escape and then closing down on the law enforcement and saying, in the elections in 4 weeks from now, we'll get rid of Sheriff Brown. So the military teams are tested, the psychiatrists are tested, the command force are tested, they get rid of the black mayor, they can laud the old team for political purposes and use it for political campaigning. Whatever we get out here, you get next, so be ready. This is Mae Brussell and Carmel, and I'll see you next week. It's very important because this is a microcosm. This is a crazy state. What we get, you'll get next, so watch out. It's coming your way. This is Mae Brussell and Carmel. You take care, and I'll be with you next week.